We seek out people and environments and situations that follow the patterns in which we've already lived and experienced.
They never checked their language. They never tried to find contrary evidence that they're actually good enough. And so they just said these things in passing that you picked up when you're a babe. And now look at what it's done, how we interpret those messages.
Welcome to Evolve Ventures, where people like you can dependably go to shift your consciousness to unlimited potential. I am your host, Bianca Thomas.
And I'm your host, Emilia Smith. Welcome back to another episode of Evolve Ventures. We're really glad that you're here. Number 110. Why don't I feel good enough? Bianca, how do you want to lead into this one? Because it definitely is a touchy subject. And before we get started, one of the things that our team shared with us was to make sure that we put a disclosure out there. Prior to getting into these episodes, prior to getting into the IG lives that we'll be doing this entire month, prior to all of the content that we're going to be putting out there, we want to make sure that we first say we see you. We see that this might trigger you. We see that this might touch a very delicate open wound in you. And so we want to having our intention being from the heart and having those, all of our listeners and our community members, we really want to see you grow at a rate that doesn't inflict more trauma and that doesn't inflict more pain that cannot serve your growth. So before we get into this episode, I just want to say that our intentions are pure. However, if you do need to pause, take a breath, ground yourself, and revisit as we dig into this topic, please honor yourself. You might not notice that you might be getting triggered. And so we just want to start to prime your subconscious mind that might be happening. So if it might feel hard to breathe, or your throat might get scratchy, or your palms might get sweaty as you're listening to these podcasts come out, those are great indicators to feel in your body, in your physiology. Or for me, I get really hot. And just tuning into your physiology and when you might be emotionally flooded, that can really help so that you can ground yourself and really contemplate and have the growth that we hope you have. And like I said, not a traumatic growth journey. That's not what we're here for. So that being said, B, take it away.
Working as a clinician for the last 3 years, I just surpassed 900 coaching calls, which is 900 hours basically of face-to-face time with people like you, and working with clients with mental health challenges, or leaders and entrepreneurs, or just everyday people who just want to grow and get better. There has been this common theme with genuinely every single one of them. And it's this deep-rooted question that they all ask themselves. Why am I not good enough? Why do I not feel good enough? Why is it that I don't believe good things can happen to me, or that they're going to happen to me, or that I can be loved or cared for or important? And I really remember feeling this way my entire life. It's genuinely only been within the last year that that's gone away. I remember so many days where I would come home from school or from work or from a gathering, or like a relationship would end, and I would just remember looking in the mirror, sobbing, just saying, why aren't I good enough? What is wrong with me? Why can things never go right in my life? And this is the same thing that I've seen and heard with all of these people that I've worked with. And what we want to talk about today and what we plan on talking about in this episode is, well, why don't you? And what's contributing to that? And what has led up, what has happened in your life to get you to that point? Because none of us are born inherently not feeling good enough. We're all born and things happen that lead to that, which results in us not feeling good enough, in us not feeling worthy, and us not feeling like we matter or that we're important or that someone gives a shit. Like, I remember feeling that too. Like, no one cares. And it's because I'm not good enough that nobody cares, and they never will. And like I said, this is a theme that I have witnessed in those 900 coaching and therapy calls. So, what is the first thing that triggers this, that causes this? At the very first primary fundamental level, it comes down to your family. And now this is not to say that it's your family's fault, but it's attachment. It's, what were the experiences that you had as a child? How did that shape you? What were the experiences that you had, and how were you communicated to when you did things? Was it growth-minded or was it fixed-minded? Were you only praised when you got 100, or were you praised on effort? Did your parents tell you that they love you no matter what? Or was it only when you do what they want, then you get love, and then you get celebration, and then you get praise? I think so many of us, we don't want to have to look at our past. We're like, oh my God, childhood BS and blah, blah, blah. And I don't think you need to go super deep into your past to be able to work on where you are right now. But I think we need a solid understanding of it. Because if you don't understand what caused it, you'll never be able to fix it. So, number one, family and conditioning. That's what I wrote down. So for me, I remember my parents really did the best that they could. They really did. They provided everything for us, and they tried to instill good values in us and really tried to instill hard work and, you know, getting good grades and being presentable and whatnot. But within my family, and last month we talked about culture, within my culture, there was very much this set of expectations that you're only good enough if you look this certain way, act this certain way, and do these certain things. And if not, then you will not be enough. And my siblings didn't really take that on to the extent that I did, but for whatever reason I did. And growing up in that and experiencing that the way that I did, it was like this measuring stick I could never reach. It was this measuring stick that I could never measure up to. And it started this ripple effect of every area of my life. It was like, oh my God, like, can I do anything right? Is there anywhere that I'm enough? Is there anywhere that I'm doing something that I'm doing it in a way that is going to get me love? Because it didn't feel that way. And I know so many people are going through that same thing where it's like, no matter what, they just don't feel like they can do enough, or that they're being enough, or that they can have enough. And it leads to this sense of lack.
And that kind of leaves a gaping hole in people's experience. B,
For sure.
I have a question for you, because I see this all the time with coaching, and I've seen it everywhere I look, honestly, since I was a little girl. And I would have my friends come up to me and ask me questions on how they should on how they should like go about handling a certain situation, or how they should talk to their parents about this. And literally, like, I would always be people's go-to. And I've had so many people to me say like it's crazy. You like, I've gone to therapists for 4 years and they haven't even come close to the, and I know you hear this too as a therapist and as a coach.
Every single client I have ever worked with, it's unbelievable.
Like I've gone to therapy and I've never been able to actually have like this progress or this indicator. Like, I've had that my entire life. And it's funny because I have heard so many sentiments from family members say the complete opposite, that you have to, like, completely discrediting my impact on people's lives because they just genuinely have no idea, no concept. But they're trying now, right? Some of my family members are trying to understand that, and I appreciate that. But, you know, there was almost like you can't have the impact that you aspire to have unless you have your degree, unless you are a therapist, or unless you're an accredited coach or this or that. And it's fascinating because there's such an if-then statement in some of my family members' minds, which invalidates. If I were to allow that to permeate my mindset, it feels, and it can really feel invalidating in terms of the impact that I am able to have with so many people and so many clients, and, you know, that our team is having. And so for me, what you just said there in terms of like, you know, I took it the way that I did, that's what I would really want to zoom into if you're open to it in this episode, because I see this with so many people, and I also see this in different family members and myself. And the way, and obviously we can only get so deep in this, but the taking it the way that you did. You have 2 siblings, as do I, and we have these different perspectives. We grow up in the same homes. We have the 2 same parents, right? But yet oftentimes, and this is what a lot of people experience that I've talked to and that have come to me for help, is that like, I just don't understand, like, why did I get it different, or why did I interpret it differently? We might have had the same exact quote unquote, mom and dad may have said the same exact thing to me when I was 3 that they said to you, but you interpret it as the message, which was, I'm not good enough. And so I know that with what you just said, I want to zoom into that moment, like, from all of the clinical work that you've done and from all of the experience in terms of how you observed that one moment for people, what would you say is the biggest differentiator between one's interpretation at the very moment? Because for me, what I see is that one moment lays the pathway, and that's kind of what we're going to be talking about this month. It lays the pathway and gets so stuck and ingrained, that one meaning that I wasn't good enough, that gets so ingrained in people's minds, where everything that they do gets like filtered through that film, that filter, and it like suffocates them. And for you, I know that felt that way. So curious to get your perspective on how you know, zoom into that for me.
In all honesty, there's not one differentiator. There's a lot of different reasons why, okay, let's use me and my brother, right? There's a lot of different reasons why me and my brother might have interpreted, what's an example I can use?
It's like climbing up the stairs. You 2 are at the bottom of the stairs. Mom or dad says you can do it, and you interpret it one way and your siblings interprets another way.
Well, like, yes, but you also got to think about it this way. My brother is 2 years older than me, so he heard a lot of different things than I did those first 2 years, which shaped him, which shaped his temperament, which shaped his conceptualization of the world. So like, we're not both starting at the bottom of the stairs. He has like 2 years on top of me, you know?
For sure.
So, but let's say you take a set of twins. Let's just use that as an example, okay?
Yeah.
You take twins,
mm-hmm.
and so they're born at the same time, let's even say they're identical twins. So they have all of the same, not like 99.999% of them is the same, except for that 1%, which is their mind.
Yep.
Their consciousness, which that goes into
whole
another whole
story.
rabbit hole of like, well, what is consciousness? But basically they're exactly the same, for lack of a better phrase. They're basically exactly the same. Mom and dad, or mom and mom, or dad and dad, or whomever you're living with. You're raised the same way, you see the same things, you're told the same messages. Why does one interpret it one way and one interpret it the other? Number one, attention. What are you paying attention to? What do you notice? What do you see? What do you pick up on? Number two, what are you retaining? How are you retaining that information? Number three is motivation. And not motivation in the rah, like I'm motivated, but what are the motivating factors in your life? So if I am more motivated by, so motivation is like likes, dislikes, interests, what you look up to, what you aspire to, what not in this specific context, right? So if I have a greater relationship, let's say, or one of the twins has a greater relationship with mom, one of the twins has a greater relationship with, let's say it's two moms, with the other mom. So one of them is going to pay more attention and retain information from one mom compared to the other. So attention, retention, what are you retaining? What are you keeping? And what's directing what you're paying attention to? Well, that's going to shape the information and how you interpret it. That's going to determine what things mean to you when they do happen. So if something happens, one sibling might take it in as, oh my God, I'm not good enough. The other one might say, okay, this is a challenge. How do I get better? There's so many factors that go into that. And I think it's important, but you can't change the past, right? But what you can change is how you're interpreting information now. And I believe that that's the more important component. So what makes this up? What makes up our sense of self-worth? Well, number one, it's the way you communicate to yourself. Why don't I feel good enough? Because I consistently looked in the mirror and told myself, pardon my language, but that I was a worthless piece of shit. I can't even tell you the amount of times I've said that to myself.
That's so sad. Why did you say that to yourself?
Because I genuinely believed it.
Why did you believe that? Who did you hear that from? You didn't just create that in your mind. And I'm going to challenge you here, but like you didn't just randomly as a 3-year-old all of a sudden piece together those words and have a negative meaning that made you feel bad about yourself.
Well, this goes into the second part. I placed my worth based on other people loving me, other people giving me validation. If I got 100, if I got anything less than 100, I was worthless. Trying to compete with my brother because I didn't think I was good enough compared to him. There was a lot of things. There was a lot of things that happened. And I took all of those things and then based on what I paid attention to, what I retained, and the meaning I took from it, I started to believe I am worthless. I am fundamentally not enough. And no matter what I do, it's not going to matter. And even when my parents or my siblings or friends or cousins told me that wasn't true, I did not believe them. Because I just believed it inherently. It was like, no matter what you said, you're not going to change my mind because I have no evidence to believe the contrary. There is nothing in this world proving to me that that's not true. And this is why you can take someone and show them all of these people that love them, all of these people that think that they're good enough. But if you do not believe it, it doesn't matter. So one of the biggest things that ties into this is performance or action. A lot of people who have a low sense of self-worth or who don't think they're good enough have broken a lot of promises to themselves because they set these unrealistic goals. They put these unrealistic expectations on themselves, and then when they can't achieve it, it's like, see, I knew I wasn't good enough. Or they place their enoughness on someone else's opinion of them because probably growing up, they only got love when they did something that their parents wanted them to. Or they only got love when they got certain grades. Or they only got love when they took care of mom when she was sick. So the things that you experience, they really start to shape the way that you see yourself and the way that you value your own worthiness. This starts to shift and mold the way you think about yourself, the way you feel about yourself, and then the actions you take. This is called the cognitive triad in cognitive behavioral therapy. It's what you think, what you feel, and then what you do. And that is your entire experience of life. And when you are consistently communicating to yourself in one way or another that you are not enough, you are going to interpret everything in the world to show you that that's true. It's called a mental filter. You are filtering the world with that I'm not good enough lens. So when someone tells you they love you, it goes through that filter. No, I'm not good enough. And then you make a justification. Or if something small happens, it goes through that filter. See, I knew it. And then we magnify and catastrophize, right? We blow it up to be something bigger than it is because it's going through that filter. And this is how people end up staying stuck. They believe these things, and any piece of evidence that comes in, they manufacture it to fit the belief because the belief is above everything. And it really takes someone questioning you. How do you know that's true? And we're going to get into this in other episodes, so I don't want to get too deep into this. But in CBT, this is what's called cognitive restructuring. This is what I do with clients. We're going to test your evidence. Like, all right, you don't believe you're good enough? Okay. Give me an example. Well, this happened. Okay, and what did that mean? Well, it meant this. Oh. How do you know? And you're like, what? I'm like, how do you know that's true? It's like, well, because this happened. It's like, well, is that really what happened? Well, no, because this happened. Oh. Well, then maybe could this mean something else? Well, maybe it's not 100% true. Maybe it's like 80% true. Oh, okay. So you start getting people to question. Because once you can, and again, we're going to get more into this in future episodes, but you don't feel good enough, number one, because of your communication with yourself and the way you're interpreting the world.
I want to add to that because this is a lot of the work that I've done with my clients that I've found to be very effective. And so you had mentioned a lot of clinical words that I'm really grateful for because what that had helped me on my growth journey was to research and understand it on a deeper level of what it actually meant. Because I know there's a lot of people that have an aversion to therapy or don't necessarily have such a positive light when it comes to that, because when you don't feel like you're good enough and when you don't feel as though you're winning in life, it gets hard. You know, you kind of want to hide that. That's kind of a societal thing. Like, don't show anyone that you're struggling, right? So there's one methodology that I've really helped myself in this regard and also helped a lot of people. And it's IFS, internal family systems. And B, you and I were talking about this earlier, but I want to, again, zoom in on that one part because there was something that stuck out there that I want to make sure that I share my perspective on because of how much it's helped people. So, and I'll give an example to describe that, but essentially like from very basic level, IFS essentially, and I use this analogy all the time with people all the time. If you've ever felt like there's a part of me that really likes cheese, but there's a part of me that also like really knows that cheese is not good for me. Like, for example, I have a part of me that like doesn't physiologically bode well with any sort of milk. And then there's another part of me that says, I'm not lactose intolerant. I'm just intolerant of lactose, right? Shaping the mind to try to make it seem as though that part that actually just doesn't bode well with cheese, that like, it's okay. So therefore having some cheese is not going to be a bad idea. So there's one part of me that starts to convince the other part. So anyways, I'm not going to get deep into it, but essentially high level, IFS, internal family systems, is a framework to help you understand that you have multiple parts of you, and that theoretically in this theory, we psychologically develop multiple parts of us that serve us or have served us in a particular part of our journey. In this instance, it might be in the journey of not feeling good enough. And there's a thing called managers. There's parts of you that might be trying to manage your life. And I've been so much like, I've definitely experienced this. There's definitely a part of me that tries to manage my life. And I've seen it in clients, tries to manage their life. And I actually got off the phone with a client earlier today, and I'll keep it anonymous, but this part of her is definitely her biggest inner critic. It doesn't hold the belief that she's good enough. And when I started to ask her, like, why, the evidence, what you just said, be like, okay, tell me why, give me the evidence. There was a voice in, AKA her part, that inner critic part, that actually came out and spoke and said, well, because of this, this, and this. Like, oh, no way. You definitely don't have the time, the energy, the resources to be able to do that. No, you have no idea how. Like, and literally it had a voice that came forward, which you talk all the time about automatic thoughts. We all have those. That's the language, that's the words that we have in our heads that we've crafted together from a very young age, how we've communicated to ourselves. But taking it a deep level, and this is why I love the IFS system here, is because that inner critic voice, and this is just one part of people, that models someone else's voice that was in your upbringing. So like in this instance for this client, that was 100% her mom. Her mom used to say that to herself, and she, being a youngin', observed that, right? Paid attention to that with or without choice. And so she developed that language that strung together what she's now telling herself and believing in, which is limiting her from setting bigger dreams and better goals, which I'm really excited to help her work through. But B, to that point, the like, you had said a quote, the I'm not good enough, or I'm worthless or whatnot. You definitely, like I said, like, we don't just hear these things and make up these voices in our heads. They're observed voices that happened around you while you're little. And that inner critic that you had to be like, that was probably heard by someone that you really care and love. And that's what I find a lot of people try to avoid, because they don't want to hurt their caregivers, because they're so afraid of going separate ways and throwing shame to their parents, their grandparents, whoever raised them. Because what is underneath that, then their parents, their caregivers, whoever, might have to actually face the fact that like they never checked their language. They never tried to find contrary evidence that they're actually good enough. And so they just said these things in passing that you picked up when you're a babe. And now look at what it's done, how we interpret those messages. And I have a ton of different ones that I've had in that regard. But again, I just want to pull that in from a communication standpoint, because the words that we hear in our head, they're so often that they are literally the same exact voice that we've heard our caregivers say to themselves, and we just have picked it up.
Not always, though. No one ever said that to me. And I know that with certainty. I started believing that within myself because of all of the other things that I heard, and then I interpreted it and made meaning out of it, that it meant that.
But did you ever hear a caregiver, just out of curiosity to kind of rumble with it, did you ever hear a caregiver of yours, and I know you have a big family, so it could have been any of them or any school teacher or whatever, actually say, and I'd be curious to see if your memory, that's not even a fair question, but do you have some sort of part of you that recognizes that a caregiver heard or overheard someone saying that to themselves?
Specifically the worthless POS?
Yeah, something like that. Even close to it, remotely close.
They said things similar, but it was never that verbiage.
Okay.
So to your point, yes, the messages we hear, we end up internalizing, making it our own, and then communicating that to ourselves. So you are 100% right.
Mm-hmm.
For a lot of people, it's not that they heard that specific verbiage, though. It's that they took what they saw, what they interpreted, and what they heard, and then made it fit for themselves. And then based on the things that they went through, then made even further meaning based on that.
Yes. Okay. Yep.
So for me, it was you are genuinely not good enough and no one's ever going to love you.
Mm-hmm.
No one said that to me.
Right.
Nobody.
No one would, because they love you. But they might be saying something similar to themselves that you observed.
Well, no one ever said that no one would love me, but I did get a lot of messages of not specifically this verbiage, but something along the lines of, we are only going to be happy with you if you do this.
Yeah, so the if-then conditions.
Yeah, very much so. So a lot of that love was conditional. And I was only ever... It was as if I was only ever recognized when I did what someone else wanted me to do. So that's where that external validation, the need for other people to determine my worth came into play, which is why I ended up in so many bad relationships, because I was so used to not recognizing my own value, because that was never celebrated. Whenever I did something, it was wrong. It was only right when someone else believed it was. So I sought out relationships where it was the same dynamic. And this is how the law of attraction works, or karma. I know I've talked about this numerous times on the show, so I'm not going to get into it too deep right now, but we seek out people and environments and situations that follow the patterns in which we've already lived and experienced. And Lisa Feldman Barrett, her book, How Emotions Are Made, she goes into the neuroscience of why this happens.
Fascinating.
I'm not going to get deep into that, but just understand that we seek out what is familiar to us. And we seek out situations and environments that validate what we already think and feel about ourselves. So if you have a belief that you're not good enough, you are going to seek it out. Why? Because it's familiar.
Because our brains will always seek that. Because if we were to go outside of our familiar, our brains would have to actually do work. The brain does not optimize to have to do work. It tries to maintain its metabolic state. Because if you have to think all that, all this stuff that's not familiar, your brain is eating up calories. So physiologically, your brain is wired to have you stay where it's safe, where it's familiar.
100%. I think this is a good place to wrap up. What do you think? We went super deep into this.
Why you don't feel good enough? Or why don't I feel good enough? It's a question to definitely contemplate. But like we said at the very beginning, be mindful to what might come up. And, Bianca and I, our door is always open for you. Do it and be. Let me ask you this. Contemplating this question on your own accord, is there only an upside or is there a downside to this? Because you've seen it from a clinical perspective. Not that my perspective is invalid. So for example, I think I've noticed and I've seen people who contemplate this question, and when they start to unlayer the why they don't feel good enough, it can actually be very traumatizing if they're doing it alone and if they're not doing it with someone who can help them unpack this. This is why we have friends and we go to our friends and we talk to our friends about things instead of just contemplating in our own head. I think it can be really tricky. So I was going to ask you, is there any downside to contemplating this question once you get to a certain layer?
Yeah, then you actually got to do work to change it.
Hey.
Which a lot of people don't want to do.
Hey. That's interesting because, like, yeah, that's true. And okay, let me ask you one question underneath that. What happens when you don't change? And if you don't do that work, what have you seen?
Then you end up in therapy on my couch or in my office or on telehealth or whatever. In 20 years.
And if it's left untouched, medication, and you lose yourself.
And now, granted, I say that, and I don't think therapy is like, I am the first person to say everyone should go to therapy. Right. Everybody, I don't care what's going on in your life, every single person should go to therapy. That's what I believe. So I'm not saying that therapy is like this daunting experience and you should only go but I think a lot of people, they don't question these things. They don't ask themselves these questions. And it's because they don't feel good enough that they get stuck in this belief that nothing is ever going to change and the future is bleak. And no matter what I do, no matter what happens, it's always going to be this way. Mm-hmm. The downside of not asking yourself these questions is that you never get to show yourself that that's not true. Mm. And I have worked with so many people who have been through the most unspeakable, horrific things. Like, they have not had a day in their life when they did not have something happen to them. And if a lot of them try to take their own life because they don't believe that change can happen, because they didn't believe that they could get out of the things that they did. But the reason I say this is because they took a chance. Mm. They said, I'm going to at least try. And nothing might come out of it, but let me at least try. And they've been able to completely change their life. So I'm not saying come to me specifically. I'm not saying come to Emilia. But talk to somebody. Because believe me, I know what it's like to feel fundamentally at your core that you are not enough and that nothing is going to change. But I'm here to tell you that it's not true. And you can. You just have to try. You just have to be willing to put yourself out there a little bit. And find a right match. Not every therapist is going to be right for you. Again, no exaggeration. No exaggeration. I think I've worked with about 100 people. Every single one of them has told me that I'm going to be blunt, but that their therapists before have sucked. Mm-hmm. So again, not to toot my own horn or anything, but finding a therapist is like dating. You're not going to date unless you're like me, the first 10 years of my dating experience.
We got something special going on here. I'm just saying, just saying.
Don't do what I did in dating and just date the first person that says hi to you. Go.
Come on some dates with us.
You need to find a therapist that fits for you. So if you meet someone and you don't feel a connection with them, don't see them again. Let them know, hey, this wasn't a good fit. They'll be like, cool, peace out. And then you can go find a new therapist or a coach or whoever. But don't let one bad therapy experience also deter you from not seeking out someone else, because that you are going to find a match eventually. Again, you just have to be willing to try.
So true. Thank you for saying that. B, episode suggestion and key takeaway.
Episode suggestion is number 50. Wow, I can't talk. Number 59, limiting beliefs that were holding us back.
Ooh, that's a goodie.
It's a goodie. Key takeaway. I know you don't feel good enough, but it is possible to change that. And I truly am the proof.
Episode suggestion from my end is number 36, the power of courage. And my key takeaway is with that. The power to build the courage to combat this constructed belief. That is the hardest thing. Genuinely one of the hardest things, if not the hardest things, that you will do in your journey. But it is so deeply worth it. And Bianca and I have a whole community that can raise their hand and that can share with you. They were right there where you are right now. And the other side that they've gotten to, because they've mustered the courage, and maybe they've brought it. They've borrowed it from Bianca and I. Do that if it serves you. Borrow our courage. Bend our ears. How did we do it? How did the people in our community do it? Like, there are people here, especially in Evolved Ventures Society, to help you through that journey. Maybe you're not ready for therapy. Maybe you're not ready for a coach. You're definitely ready for someone, though, to help be there with you through it. And I will toot our horn. I will not suggest a better place. And you're here now, and our door is open for you. So with all the love in the world, the power of courage, it starts, and it's already within you. But I know that might be hard to believe. So we'll work on that this month.
Thank you all so much for listening. The entire theme of this month is going to be all about self-worth. So if you want to keep diving into this topic, if you want to keep exploring this with us, follow along and join us for Out of the Mud.
We'll see you soon. Thank you, everyone, for joining. We'll talk to you soon.
Bye.
Bye.